All right, let's jump right into something that, well, it touches every single one of us, our families. Today, we're doing a deep dive into how gender roles and responsibilities have truly changed or maybe haven't. We're asking, are we genuinely marching towards equality in our homes, or do, significant power imbalances continue to shape our daily lives?
Yeah, and our mission today is really to cut through the noise, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from quite a range of sources. We want to give you a quick but still really thorough understanding of these, well, complex sociological debates. We'll be shining a light on different perspectives and, crucially, the evidence that might challenge some of our assumptions about modern family life.
Okay, good. So before we really get into how families have shifted, let's quickly nail down a few fundamental concepts. They'll keep coming up. First, gender roles. When we talk about this, we're not talking about biology, right?
No, not at all. These are basically the socially constructed behaviors, attitudes, activities. Everything society sort of deems appropriate for men and women. They're learned pretty much from birth, and they can vary hugely across different cultures and different time periods, too.
Got it. Then there's domestic labor.
Right. And this is just all the unpaid work that keeps a household running. Everything from cooking, cleaning, packing lunches, scheduling appointments, managing the budget.
The invisible work.
Exactly. The often invisible work that's absolutely essential for family life.
And finally, power relationships within the family.
Yes. This is about who holds the cards, really. Who makes the big decisions. Who controls the resources, like money, and ultimately whose needs and desires get prioritized day to day. It's not always obvious, but it's incredibly influential.
Okay. So to understand the journey, we need a bit of historical context, yeah?
Right.
Definitely. We really need to glance back. Think about, say, the mid-20th century, particularly in the UK. The traditional nuclear family was, well, it was the dominant model then. This was a time of what sociologists called segregated conjugal roles.
Segregated conjugal roles. And what that essentially meant was the husband typically took on the instrumental role. He was the breadwinner, focused on providing financially, and the wife.
The wife adopted what was known as the expressive role. Her domain was the home, housework, childcare, and, crucially, managing the emotional well-being of the family. This division wasn't just seen as traditional, it was often presented as, perfectly natural.
Right. And what's truly fascinating, maybe a bit challenging for us now, is that some sociologists actually argued this strict division wasn't just old-fashioned, but like essential for society.
Exactly. That brings us to the functionalist perspective, with Talcott Parsons being a key figure here. He argued this traditional setup was actually functional, good for society.
Functional. Parsons had this big idea, didn't he? The functional fit thesis.
That's the one. He believed that this specific nuclear family structure, with its really clear segregated roles, was perfectly designed, almost, to meet the needs of an industrial society. It provided a stable unit for raising children, socializing them into shared norms and values.
So for Parsons, these roles, instrumental for the husband, expressive for the wife, weren't just different, they were complementary. Necessary even for family stability.
Absolutely. In his view, the family performed two irreducible functions. The first was primary socialization, basically teaching kids the basic values and norms of society. And the second was the stabilization of adult personalities.
Ah, yes, the stabilization of adult personalities, or maybe more famously, the warm bath theory.
The warm bath.
Yeah, like you picture the husband coming home after a tough day at the factory or whatever. The family, Parsons said, was like a soothing warm bath. Washes away the stress, re-energizes him for work the next day. It was all about maintaining societal stability through, well, individual well-being.
Of course, that functionalist view has faced a lot of criticism.
Oh, definitely. Many argue it's incredibly outdated, it's patriarchal, presents this overly idealized, almost rosy picture of family life. And it kind of conveniently ignores any conflict or, the negative aspects within families.
Right. And that static, almost idealized view from Parsons didn't sit well with everyone, especially as time went on. We then saw a very different idea emerge, often called the March of Progress view. People like Young and Wilmot were behind this.
Young and Wilmot. And they had a much more optimistic outlook, didn't they?
Much more. They believed family life had actually become more equal, more democratic over time. They coined that term symmetrical family.
A symmetrical family. So the idea was those old, rigid roles were becoming less segregated.
Exactly. Not totally identical maybe, but husbands and wives were starting to share more equally. Domestic tasks, childcare, decision-making,
Yeah.
even spending more leisure time together.
Okay, so what did they think was driving this shift?
Well, they pointed to several things. Increased female employment outside the home was a big one. Also, the rise of labor-saving devices, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, making housework quicker, plus improved living standards generally, smaller families, and, importantly, changing social attitudes towards gender roles. People started thinking differently.
That sounds, well, it sounds pretty good. A real march towards equality.
Yeah.
But I guess the question is, did Young and Wilmot maybe overlook some things? Like the subtle ways power might still play out, even if chores seemed more shared.
That's precisely where the really powerful critiques from feminist perspectives come into play. They started asking those tougher questions.
Absolutely. And when we talk about feminism, it's important to remember it's not just one single voice, is it?
Not at all. Different branches offer distinct critiques.
Okay, so take liberal feminists. They probably acknowledge some progress, right? Thanks to legal reforms, equal pay laws, things like that, and changing attitudes. But they'd argue true equality is still, well, elusive, mainly because gender role socialization, how we raise boys and girls differently, continues to limit opportunities and expectations.
Then you have Marxist feminism. They connect women's unpaid domestic labor directly to the bigger picture of capitalism. It's quite a different angle. They suggest women reproduce the labor force for free, by having and raising children. They socialize those kids into the dominant ways of thinking, and they act as a kind of reserve army of labor. Capitalism can hire them when needed, fire them when not. So basically, women's work at home quietly props up the whole system.
Right, prepping up capitalism. And then perhaps the most direct critique comes from radical feminism.
Yes, radical feminism looks at the very structure of the family itself and sees it as an inherently patriarchal institution, one that serves to oppress women. They really highlight how men benefit from women's unpaid labor and, crucially, their emotional work.
And it was radical feminists who gave us concepts like the dual burden.
That's right, the dual burden women doing both paid work and the bulk of the domestic work. And then Duncombe and Marsden identified the triple shift.
The triple shift? Okay, what's the third shift?
Emotional work. This is the often unseen labor of managing family feelings, mediating arguments, just generally caring for everyone's emotional needs. On top of the paid job and the housework, it's this invisible weight that many women carry, often unacknowledged, leading to exhaustion and stress.
Wow, okay, so you have these powerful theoretical critiques. But what about the actual evidence, the research? Did it really back up that optimistic march of progress idea? Did we find symmetrical families everywhere?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? And when we look at the empirical evidence, it often challenges that march of progress view quite strongly. Anne Oakley, for example, back in 1974, was a really important critic of Young and Wilmot. Her research basically said, hang on a minute, the symmetry, I'm not really seeing it. She found very little evidence of genuine equality.
So what did she find men were doing?
Well, she found men's participation was often limited to the more pleasurable bits of childcare, playing with the kids, the fun stuff, while women still carried the main responsibility for the mundane, everyday domestic chores, the cleaning, the laundry, the planning.
And has that changed much since the 70s?
Well, later studies suggest it's been slow. Gersheny in 1994 came up with this concept of lagged adaptation.
Lagged adaptation, meaning?
Meaning that while men's involvement in domestic work is slowly increasing, it's lagging way behind women's increased participation in paid work. So women are out working more, but they're still consistently doing the majority of the domestic chores and childcare at home. The adaptation is lagging behind the reality of women's working lives.
And have surveys back that up?
Yes. Subsequent British social attitudes surveys, for instance, have pretty consistently shown this trend. Despite changing attitudes towards equality, people might say they believe in it. The reality is women continue to perform the bulk of housework and childcare. And it's not just about who does the dishes either. It extends to finances, too.
Money.
Yeah.
Always a key indicator of power, isn't it?
Absolutely. Studies on financial control, like those by Paul and Vogler around 2007, they reveal something interesting. Even with joint bank accounts becoming more common, which looks equal on the surface, men often retain ultimate control over major financial decisions. Women might manage the day-to-day budget, the groceries and bills, but the big spending decisions, often still down to the man.
Right. They talked about the difference between an allowance system where the man gives the woman money for housekeeping versus pooling, where money is shared. But even with pooling, one person might still have the final say, right? So formal equality, like a joint account, doesn't always mean real power balance in practice.
Exactly. One person might effectively have veto power over big purchases, while the other is just managing the smaller stuff. It's subtle, but it's a power dynamic.
Okay, so we talked about imbalances in chores and money.
Yeah.
But you hinted earlier that there are darker aspects to these power imbalances within families.
Yes. Unfortunately, we do have to touch upon what some sociologists grimly call the dark side of family life. Which brings us to domestic violence. It's a very stark, very disturbing manifestation of power imbalance.
And we should be clear what that term covers, shouldn't we?
Feel like
It's broad.
very broad. Domestic violence includes physical abuse, obviously, but also emotional, psychological, sexual, and financial abuse. Coercive control is a key part, too. And crucially, statistics consistently show its gendered nature. The overwhelming majority of victims are women, and the vast majority of perpetrators are men.
So how do sociological perspectives try to explain this? Radical feminists must have a view here.
They certainly do. Researchers like Dobash and Dobash, for instance, argued quite powerfully that domestic violence is a direct product of patriarchy. They saw it as a mechanism, a tool used within a system that maintains male power and control over women. Their research suggested that violence often stemmed from men's desire to assert authority over their wives, almost like enforcing those traditional gender roles when challenged.
Right. And what about Marxist feminist views? Do they link it back to capitalism somehow?
Some do. Fran Ansley, for example, used quite a stark phrase, suggesting women act as takers of shit, essentially absorbing the frustrations their male partners experience due to exploitation within capitalist society. The idea is that the man is powerless at work, so he exerts power at home. Women become a sort of safety valve for male stress generated by the system.
But that view has its critics, doesn't it?
It does. It's sometimes criticized for potentially downplaying the specifically patriarchal nature of the abuse itself. It risks framing it primarily as an economic issue rather than a direct issue of male power over women. And then you have sociologists like Wilkinson, also influenced by Marxism, who suggested that stress on families caused by social inequality and material deprivation, poverty, poor housing, unemployment, could contribute to domestic violence.
But again, the criticism there is that while stress might be a factor, it doesn't fully explain why the violence is so overwhelmingly directed by men towards women, does it?
Exactly. It doesn't adequately account for the deeply gendered pattern that we see so consistently in the data.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, we can really see this core tension, can't we? It runs right through the sociological debate about families. On one side, you've got this idea of an ongoing march of progress towards greater equality, the optimistic view, the symmetrical family maybe becoming a reality. But then, countering that, we're confronted with all this evidence, these perspectives, highlighting the persistent realities of inequality in domestic labor and decision-making, and in these power dynamics, both subtle and, tragically, sometimes very overt.
Indeed. It leaves us with a lot to think about if we really consider those concepts like lagged adaptation and the triple shift, and think about the subtle ways power dynamics play out, often beneath the surface, even in households that look quite modern and progressive from the outside. What unseen emotional and psychological costs might these persistent inequalities impose? On individuals, yes, but also on the overall well-being of the family unit. And perhaps the biggest question: what might it truly take to finally bridge that gap between the ideal of equality and the lived reality in so many homes?